All right. Well, friends, I'm going to get us started here. Thank you for joining us. Glad you are with us today. I'm going to mute everyone for the next 20 to 30 minutes so that we can get through, so I can do a quick overview and hopefully answer your questions. If you have a question that you want to ask along the way, please raise your hand. Use the raise hand option, which you should see across the bottom of your screen, and I'll do my best to answer it. Or you can unmute yourself. That's the other alternative. And I'll try to keep an eye on the participants list. But we'll have a time for questions at the end as well. And I think we have some experts here, so you can also post them to the chat room if you found your way to the chat room. Encourage you to use the chat room for that kind of conversation, and people may be able to help you with that. So we had almost 50 people register for this, so I'm really grateful for the chance to do this. It will hopefully make all of our lives easier because you can answer most of your questions along the way. I want to begin our conversation today. This is designed to be kind of a 101, but hopefully tick a few other boxes along the way. I'm going to talk about, first of all, the big picture. There are two kinds of online streaming you may want to think about. First is live stream. That's Facebook Live or YouTube Live, those sorts of things. If you want a one-way stream going out, use one of those services, not Zoom. If you want people to be able to interact and ask questions, then that's where you go for to have an interactive gathering on a platform like Zoom. So multiple people can talk. Today is going to be a little bit of a hybrid of this because I'm trying to get some information out to you, but then at the end, we're going to have opportunity for questions. I see some questions in the chat room about how to raise your hand. And the easiest way to do that is go to the Manage Participants or into the Participants button. And then you should see a button there to raise your hand. And I will do my best to catch you if you raise your hand, but I can't make any guarantees. We'll have a time at the end where I'll unmute everybody and you can ask questions. So a quick overview of what is Zoom. Zoom has become the de facto standard application for online meetings. Now you talk about you just want to go have a Zoom meeting. We don't talk about having a video conference. We talk about a Zoom meeting. It includes video, audio, and screen sharing. And you can connect via a computer, a tablet, or a phone app, or you can dial in depending on your particular needs. I have about 50% of the calls I have gotten about Zoom over the last week have been about accounts. So I want to take a minute and talk to you about Zoom accounts. You only need an account if you're setting up a meeting. If you're just going to join a meeting, you do not need an account. Zoom has several tiers of accounts. I think you only need to know about two of them. First one is the free account. The free account is a full-featured account, but after 40 minutes of having more than two people in a meeting, it closes down. Then there's the paid pro account, which allows one meeting at a time for an unlimited amount of time, up to 100 participants. And so for most churches, these are my recommendations. One pro account that costs about $15 a month or $150 a year. You then set that one account is assigned to one person who schedules the meetings for everybody. And then you set, in that account, you set a preference called Join Before Host. And nobody else has to have access to the account. They just have it and it works. And so the host doesn't actually have to join the meeting. It will automatically begin when other people get in the meeting. I'm going to just pause for a second and say, does anybody have any questions about the accounts process right now? If you do, raise your hand or unmute yourself. Okay, if you don't, then you can come back and do that later. Alicia, do you have a question?
Yes. How many people did you say, and how many sessions happen on the pro account?
So the basic pro account is up to 100 people on a single meeting, one meeting at a time. So if you need to have multiple meetings at a time, you might need to have multiple pro accounts. But that's the only situation you would need that. Yeah. Spotswood, did you have a question?
No, not at the moment.
Okay.
How many of us are in? Just curiosity.
47. Rocky, yeah, yeah, go ahead, Rocky.
Should I be concerned about the visuals I'm getting from Byron Wade right now?
That's called multitasking.
Okay.
One of the resources I'll send you later reminds you about a few things about what to do and what not to do while you're on a Zoom meeting. So anyway, so I'm going to move on if there are any other questions here. Okay, let's move on. I'm going so the basic process for using Zoom is very simple. First of all, you create a meeting, then you share the access information, and then you run the meeting. It's 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to walk you through each of those steps on the way. So to create a meeting, you set up the meeting via the web or the Zoom application. And this is, there are different ways of doing this. One of the resources I will give you is a guide to how to set this sort of thing up. So not going to go through and show you the screens necessarily right now. But the most important setting, and you'll have heard this from me before and you're going to hear it again, is to check the box, enable join before host. This means that people can go into that meeting even if you're not there. So this way, your church's Zoom contact doesn't have to start every meeting. Makes their lives a whole lot easier. The other nice thing that's not immediately evident sometimes is that there are a lot of options for repeating meetings. So if you have a meeting that normally happens on a certain day of the week or a certain day of the month, you can create it as a repeating meeting. And that meeting will share the same information around, share the same access information along the way. And then you don't have to resend it or change the URL and button and the numbers every time. There's even an option in the repeating meeting settings that lets you create a repeating meeting that's not even scheduled. It's not immediately obvious there, but you can do that. So now, once you create the meeting, you want to share the access information. Zoom will give you an option to cut and paste that to an email. There's a lot of information there. They've recently added a lot more phone numbers, for example, but you don't necessarily have to do them all. If you ever get one from me, it's been customized a little bit, for example. You can do that, or you can just cut and paste it. It's fine. The one thing I want to mention is that I really encourage you to encourage people who are using your Zoom account to use their computer or tablet to access it. First of all, they can use the link that they will send you, and that will let you set up the software in advance of the meeting and test it out. You can even go in there with them using that same link at a time outside of that time and test and make sure that it's working right. I do this regularly with people who are new to Zoom, and it really does help make it a little bit more comfortable the first time. So you're not spending half an hour troubleshooting the one person who can't get their audio to work. Now I want to mention something here. There is always in this an option for phone. And I think there are 3 reasons to avoid using phones. It's not always possible. We have one person who's called in today. And I'm really glad that you're calling in. I'm really happy when people join in these meetings, but by phone. But video is important in these days. We are seeing a very small group of people face to face right now, and seeing other people builds community and connection in a way that we just can't do in other times and places. So I encourage you, encourage your folks to use video. Plus, visual prompts make the meeting run much more smoothly. It's a whole lot easier to see that frustrated person at your session meeting if you see them, not if you hear them talk. And finally, it's easier to mute and unmute them. You can absolutely mute somebody who's on the phone, but it's very difficult they can't unmute themselves, and they can't tell you, hey, unmute me, I want to speak. So it's much easier if you can do that. And inevitably, I've been on too many Zoom meetings where somebody tries to mute themselves on the phone or unmute themselves on the phone, and they end up disconnecting themselves from the meeting altogether because they just can't figure out which button on the phone is mute in just the right amount of time. So you can always use the phone option, but I encourage you to avoid it. Meetings just run better when they are done with video. So that puts us to the point of how to run a meeting. I will repeat what I've said before. It's especially the first few times, encourage your folks to mute themselves when they're not speaking. Begin each of your meetings with that reminder. You will be much happier if you do that. Otherwise, you end up with that barking dog or the siren, the fire trucks running by outside, and everybody hears it. Or there's that person who is switching devices and you end up getting feedback and echo. It's very frustrating for everyone. And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the options around video and audio, around the different views on your screen, and around chat. So you've probably noticed already that there are some audio and video settings on your computer screen as you're using Zoom. So if you move your mouse on the computer, or if you're on a tablet or phone, if you tap the screen, the controls will appear. And the slide right now is showing you what those controls look like. People who lead Zoom meetings should know how to do this, because inevitably somebody's going to answer this question, or is going to ask this question: how do I mute myself? How do I make this work? So encourage you to make sure you know where the mute button is. It's on a phone. It is in the, on a computer rather, it is in the lower left. On a phone or tablet, it's in the upper right. And I see some of you trying that out now. So
Would you repeat that, please?
Sure. Let me go back to it. So on a computer, the video and audio control strip is at the bottom of your screen. On a phone or a tablet, it is at the top of your screen. If you're using a computer, you move your mouse to make that appear. If you're on a tablet or phone, you tap the screen and it appears. And then you can mute or unmute. If you're a tablet, an iPad is a tablet. I see someone asking that question. So those should show up that way. And these give you a little sense of what those look like. Now, the other thing, I've got control of your screen a little bit now because I'm showing a slideshow. I'm doing a screen share, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. But there's another thing that all meeting leaders need to be aware of is different views of the screen. So there's a speaker view and a gallery view. Speaker view is the default first time you go into a meeting. And that focuses on the current speaker as best Zoom can determine it. Sometimes it will lag a little behind. The gallery view is something more like Hollywood Squares or the Brady Bunch, where you can see a lot of people at once. Gallery view on an iPad goes to 9, and you have to swipe and see different people across all of the different screens. On some computers, it maxes at 24. On others, it maxes at 48. So I'm going to leave the screen share for just a minute so you can see what these different views look like. So now you should be seeing probably speaker view, and that's probably focused on me or Spotswood, I'm not sure. If you tap your screen, you can swap between this and the gallery view on the upper right on your computer or on the upper left on your tablet or phone. And then you can see the gallery view. I now see all of your beautiful faces because I've only been able to see a few of you before now. So it's good to see all of you. All right, I'm gonna take back over your screen here and show you a few more things on my slideshow. So I'm happy that several of you have discovered the chat room. Thank you for this. And I'm going to get back to a couple of the questions there before we're done. The chat room is a wonderful way to communicate without distracting from the main conversation. So you can send a message to an individual or to everybody in the room. You can ask a question of other participants. Thank you all for those who've been trying to help people in the chat room. That's really wonderful. It's also a way to get the leader's attention. So you can send the leader a private message, or just put something in there so that we can all be aware of it. There are two ways to get the leader's attention. One is the chat room. The other is to raise your hand, which we've talked a little bit about. So that's kind of the 1, 2, 3. And I will, of getting started, I'm going to answer Candy's question. She asks, do I provide the access info through the email I generate, or does Zoom do that? So Zoom will generate the text of it for you, but you have to manually put it into your email program. You don't give Zoom the email addresses that you want added to the meeting. You take the information and put it into your email, which is actually, I think, a better approach most of the time, because it means that Zoom is collecting less information about who is using it. It's a little bit better in privacy. Any other questions briefly about this 1, 2, 3 part of how we get started in the meeting? Creating, sharing information, and running the basic part of a meeting. I'm going to give you some helpful hints in a minute. Yes, Alicia.
As the leader, is there a way to see the chat on the side or something? Because right now, if I click chat, it comes up right in the middle of the screen.
Yes, so what you want to do is actually run it not in a full screen, but in a window version. So you can exit the full screen and then you can have it in a window. So actually on my screen, I can see your faces on one side. I can see the chat, I can see the participant list, and I can see my PowerPoint all at the same time.
Okay, so you mean run Zoom not in a full screen, or?
Yes, so if you move your mouse over the Zoom window, there will be an option to exit full screen, and that will let you move it to a window, and then you can put multiple things in at once.
Okay. Oh, view options.
Yes.
Andy,
Yes.
I cannot get out. I'm looking at you in my iPad, but I've also got my PC up to see how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
My iPad is a touch screen. My PC is not. So I don't know how to move around on the PC. I cannot get rid of the chat window.
You should be able to close it out like any other window. Okay. That may be something we have to troubleshoot a little later as well. And thanks, Evan. That's a good point. On a laptop, if you double click on your screen somewhere, it will exit the full screen mode. Yes. Okay. I'm going to move us along and talk about a few helpful hints about things that you might not know about or might not be immediately evident, but that I've found really helpful as I've been using Zoom. Things like host features, some general hints, some best practice settings, how to use screen sharing, and then 2 features called registration and breakout rooms. So the first question, I've mentioned that the host doesn't have to be in the meeting necessarily. So I want to tell you why a host might want to be in a meeting. There are 3 reasons that there are 3 main reasons why a host might need to be in a meeting. First of all, if you want to record the meeting on your computer, you have to be the host. The host can set a recording into the cloud, but only the host can record, and then it just work, but only the host can approve a recording of the meeting locally. This meeting, for example, is being recorded to the cloud. The second thing a host can do during a meeting is to control audio video. So as you've noticed, I can mute you. I can turn off your video even. So if for some reason somebody started showing things that we didn't want to see, the host can make that go away. And that leads to the third thing that a host can do in the meeting is to remove someone from the meeting. And so at some points you may have to make that happen. God willing, it will never happen to you, but a host can do that sort of thing. And the host can also end the meeting before everybody leaves it. So kind of related to that. So some general hints, just best practices. First of all, set your name. Most of you I see have your name set. I think that's because you've created links that you had through registration, and it links that up. Another good best practice that I find in committee meetings and when we're doing Zoom is thumbs up or thumbs down. So if you're ready to move, all those, rather than trying to make everybody unmute themselves to vote on something, just say, put your thumb up if you're in favor, or thumb down if you're not. That can be a really helpful way to move quickly through some conversation that might otherwise take a little bit of time. Something else that isn't always immediately evident is that you really should, if possible, sit in front of a light. It looks really funny if you have light behind you, but not in front of you. So your face becomes dark and you're more of a silhouette. So sit in front of a light or a window. Don't put the window behind you and no light in front of you. Next general hint, thank you, Byron. You mentioned this, you got ahead of me. Use headphones. That makes life a whole lot easier especially in this day and age. I talked to a friend today who was telling me that he and his wife and their 2 kids all have computers. They're sitting at the dining room table and they're all together and each in their own meeting. So use headphones. That will make it much more manageable along the way. And I told you I'd be saying it, I've said it before and I'll say it again, always mute thyself. If you're not speaking, mute yourself. It will make everybody happier. Mention that there's a few configuration settings you might want to pay attention to. These are on the Zoom website at zoom.us/profile/setting. And once you log in, you can turn on these settings and it will make life easier for you as a leader. First one I've said before, join before host. You want to turn that setting on. This means that people can join the meeting before you get there. Today, I actually turned it off because I didn't want you joining before I got here. But most of the time, you'll want people to begin to gather and the conversation, the chit chat can happen before you get there. Or if you're the host and you're setting up meetings for other people, this means you don't necessarily have to open every single meeting. The next one is you want to turn off meeting passwords. This is a good thing in many ways that Zoom has added this feature because it helps you to lock down some things if you need, but it makes it a little more complicated. You not only have to have the 9 or 10 digit number, but you have to have a separate password to get into the meeting. And this can get really complicated, especially if you're dialing in by phone. There's an option that's pretty new called Join from your browser. This lets people get into the meeting quickly without downloading the client. And in many cases, for basic meetings, this is just fine. There are a few settings that you have to have the client on your computer, but for most of us, Join from your browser will be just fine for somebody just trying to call into a session meeting or a Bible study. One thing that, this is kind of an informational piece as much as anything, there's a setting to allow live streaming of meetings. So the host can actually live stream a meeting. I can press a button down here. I didn't do it today, but I could make this meeting go live on Facebook or YouTube as long as those accounts are linked properly. So a couple more, so I want to talk to you a little bit about screen sharing. You're experiencing this right now. This is how I've kind of taken over your screen so that you're a little more focused. This is an easy way to show a presentation as I'm doing, or jointly edit a document. There's nothing quite like editing by committee over Zoom, but it certainly is easier when you can put somebody's Microsoft Word on the screen and you can see what you're doing. When you do this though, you want to share an app. You don't want to share your whole screen. The things that might pop up around the edges of your computer screen, you might not want other people on your call to see. So just always share an app, and that will help with that. There are features for a whiteboard and to annotate. So I can, for example, come in here and draw on top of what you're seeing, as you can see there. And I can also, and other people could do the same thing. You can also, if you don't have a screen share going, you can share a whiteboard. I did this yesterday when I was working with our group planning worship for small churches this week on Zoom, and we were able to kind of see what we were working on. It's like having a whiteboard or a chalkboard in the room or newsprint. So just know that those are there. Finally, before you use screen sharing in a meeting, go in, start the meeting with nobody in it and test it, because you may have to give it some special permissions. You may have to permit the computer to permit your computer to be controlled by Zoom, or for Zoom to see everything. So you don't want to have to, and sometimes to make that take effect, you have to restart Zoom. You don't want to have to do that in the middle of a meeting. David asks a really good question about, is it obvious how to select a particular app? Yes. When you press screen share, it will ask you, do you want to share your whole screen, or do you want to share one of the many apps that might be running, or few apps that might be running in different cases? So yes, it's pretty obvious. But again, that's another reason to test it before you go into like a presentation like this one. I want to mention two other features that might be of help in some particular situations. First of all is registration. Now, you all have experienced this. It's a built-in feature for Zoom that you can set up when you create a meeting. And it collects a little bit of information and then sends an email with unique access information. So that email is tailored just to you. If somebody loses it, they can call the host, and if you needed it, I could just resend it to you. One of the very nice things about this is that you can track how many people you're expecting. Like for a meeting like this one, if we had done this and 10 people signed up for it, we would probably not have a PowerPoint. It would be very much more laid back. But with 50 people, we need some structure and direction about how that's going to work. And so I wanted to make sure that I knew what I might be getting into with you all today. It also means that I have collected information on all of you, so I can follow up with you by email. So I will pull the list when this meeting is over, and I've had a chance to collate the resources, and I'll email you out with the resources that we found, and a copy of this presentation, for example. That was a question someone asked. So it also means that you can limit attendance. If you find out that somebody who you don't need to have in the meeting is wanting to be in the meeting, you can remove them from it. Or you can require approval before it actually sends the invitation. Sometimes it also is helpful to know if you're going to max out. So if you're putting out something and you've got a 100-person maximum for your account, but you have 150 people registered, you might need to know that before the meeting begins. Finally, with registration, you can pre-configure the breakout rooms in the meeting. And that leads us to our next feature I'm going to tell you a little about, which is breakout rooms. This is where we can configure different rooms for separate conversations. You tell Zoom how many you want. You can name each one, and people can be pre-assigned, as I mentioned, or they can be randomly distributed. And then those participants return to the main room when the host closes the breakout rooms. This is another reason why you might need to log in, because you have to be signed in as the host. I will, if we have a minute when we're done, I will be glad to put us into some little small groups for conversation if you'd like to see how that works. It's a pretty cool feature, and so if you're too cheap to buy a couple of extra Zoom accounts and you want to have 4 Sunday school classes on Sunday, you could just have everybody come to Sunday school and then have somebody checking you in and putting people in the breakout room that they want. So that's an option if you're interested. Not saying that you necessarily have to do it that way, but it's certainly a possibility. So it's a helpful process to know that it's there. I promised that I would give you a few tips about how to lead a meeting with Zoom. So if you're having a session meeting, as I know at least one of you is tonight, and it's going to happen over Zoom, here's a few suggestions. First of all, be sure you log in to get those host controls. It can be really helpful if you're running a meeting to be able to do that. The gallery view is really useful in this moment, especially if you're in a smaller meeting. This way you can see everybody's faces and you don't have to scan through anything. You can look and see that person who's got a scowl on their face, or the person who's raising their hand along the way. It's also possible when you're logged in and leading a meeting, it can be really helpful to be able to mute people. Inevitably, I'm in a meeting and somebody is going to have, their dog starts barking and doesn't stop, and you can look at your list of participants and see who that is, and you can turn it off and keep them from doing that. It makes the meeting a lot better. And it also, the last thing just about leading a meeting is to encourage people to raise their hand, to use that raise hand feature, or to use chat to get your attention. So Wilson, how do you tell who has the barking dog? That's a great question. So if you have the participant list up, there's a microphone, and the microphone fills with the volume. And so you can see whose microphone is filled and who's not on mute. And then you just start doing it. I have been in settings where it got out of hand, so I just had to mute everybody and then turn them back on one by one. Sometimes that's what you have to do. So those are that's a quick and dirty overview of Zoom. I want to open up the conversation now, hear your questions. I'm going to scan back through the chat, first of all. Yes, this will be shared. Antonio asked that question. I will share. Everybody who signed up for this will get an email from me with some more information. Answer that one. Is there a way to create a contact list in Zoom? I think there is, but most of the time I just create that list in my email because I'm communicating with that same group of people in another setting as well. So that's the way to go. I do want to mention that sometimes there are computer or hardware issues that are keeping people from being able to speak or be heard or hear. I have had to help people turn their cameras on or to adjust the privacy settings for their microphones. So sometimes you do have to go into your settings on your iPad or your computer and adjust that control so Zoom can have access to that. Where is the breakout room option? That's a great question. So only the host is going to see the breakout room option. It's going to appear in that bottom black bar as one of your options along the way. So you can see that there. Jordan asked, how can we help someone other than the host with muting or unmuting all participants? Or how we have someone other than the host? So to do that, you will need, the host has to join the meeting and then can assign a co-host. So in the participants window, you can select a co-host or even make someone else the host of the meeting. So the co-host can help with that. The thumbs up and thumbs down, which you are seeing, I believe that shows to everyone. So for example, I'm going to put my thumb up. You should see, if you're on a participant list, you'll see a thumb up next to my name. Let's see. So Antonio asked a good question about Zoom, be in Zoom via the video option and then join by phone. Yes. So you can do there are little arrows next to those mute and video buttons, and you can select different sources. If you push the one next to the mute button, you'll see an option that says switch to phone audio. And that's one that you will sometimes you'll be in a setting where your video is fine, but your audio is not. And that might be a good option to use. Be sure when you use that, it will give you a participant ID. And when you have that participant ID, it will match your phone connection to your video computer connection. And then you can control your mute status via your computer. Thumbs up, thumbs down for voting. Yes, there's a yes and no option. There are various other options that can be used for voting. And there's some configuration in that you do in the web interface. Okay, so Wilson asked, can you talk a bit more about app, not whole screen? When you press share your screen, it will pop up with a screen that says, I can't share it with you because it's difficult to share my Zoom, but I'm going to describe it to you right now. And the first option is desktop, but then it shows me all of my apps that are running. It also shows a whiteboard. I will make a note to include a screenshot of that, which I'll do separately in the final version of this. Asking about, do all PCs have a microphone? No, they do not. The speaker will work, but they cannot be heard. So, yes, and I see Melinda, thank you for answering Alan's question. This is what the chat room is good for. Are there other questions? Let me open the conversation here. Unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question, or if you have an idea to share. I am not an expert. I've just used this a good bit. So, Lloyd, did you have a question?
Where's thumbs up?
Thumbs up is under, if you load the participant list, so at the bottom it gives you participants, you'll see options, yes, no, go slower or go faster. And then under more, there's a thumbs up.
Oh yeah, I see it, right.
Okay. Now, another one just to be aware of with that, sometimes just the thumbs up is, you just want to ask everybody to put their thumb up, their physical thumb. It might be easier. So, all right. So let me call on Lynn.
I was just wanting to check to see if my microphone works. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Great.
All right, thank you. This has been really helpful.
Good. Wilson.
I'm just following this app, not whole screen. That essentially means if you've got a Word document up you want to share in the meeting, you can flip back between, say, a PowerPoint like you've got here and a Word doc. Kind of
Yes.
along the way. Okay.
That's correct. All right. Dwayne.
Andy, Medora and I are doing a class tonight that includes a video. We're doing the Entering the Passion of Jesus video series with Amy Jill Levine. And I'm wondering, we're trying to make it interactive with the class by putting them into groups to work. I'm just not sure I'm comfortable yet with the separate groups function. Are you going to have time to go back over that again, or?
I can do that. Let me make a note, and it may be easier, Dwayne, for us to talk offline.
Sure.
I could show you that. So we can do that today though. So
we've managed to get the video in without too many glitches, but
good
in our sample
well, and be aware too, I'll say this in everyone's hearing, there is an option to when you share your screen, there's an option to optimize screen share for video clip.
Yes,
and so you want to use that.
We learned that the hard way. Yes.
Yep. All right, Melinda, you had a question.
It's not a question, it's just a comment. When Zoom sends the link to invite everyone, there is a whole lot of information in it. I found it easier just to cut and paste the link, and that way people know exactly what they need to do.
Yes, I second and third that. If you ever get a Zoom link from me, it's going to be pared down a lot. I usually will include one of the phone numbers, but just one. And because you don't have to call. The 301 area code is a Baltimore area code. The 646 area code is a New York area code. Those are the two that I usually will include, one of those two. So I narrow it down. Okay, let's see. Mary, you had a question.
Spotswood has a question.
Okay, Spotswood, go ahead. And we'll pick up
I'm using both my PC and my iPad. I have got the iPad in the full screen view and the PC in the shoe view. I'm finding that very helpful.
If you're leading a meeting, sometimes it's really helpful to have two devices. That's actually a really good point, because then, especially if you've got a PowerPoint, you can see what other people are seeing, and you always will know what is on their screen, even if you're moving around your computer doing something else. That's a great point. Thanks. The one thing I will note is be very careful with that, to only have audio on one device, because it will very quickly start to echo and feedback. So just be very aware. Yes. Have it completely muted, as Jordan says. Yes. Mary, you had a question. You're unmuted at least.
Oh, I was really just playing around with it, but I do have a question since you called on me. So to set up a Zoom account, I assume we just go to zoom.com or something and we'll get instructions.
Zoom.us.
Zoom.us. Okay, thanks.
Yep. Let me also say, if you are not sure if this is for you, if you need to give this a try to see if your church will work with this, we are glad to share the Presbytery Zoom account for meetings if there's nobody else using it. So we only have one host ourselves, but and Presbytery meetings obviously do take priority. But if you would like to, certainly if you're going to give it a try and just see if this is right for you, be in touch with me and I'll be glad to set up the meeting for you. Other questions, and there's my contact information if you don't have it already.
Andy, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I'm trying to edit the invitation right now, and I looked at what Melinda had said and what Mary Todd had said, and I'm just confounded as to how you get a telephone number in there. When I edit, I put all the information in. I look at the invitation and all it gives is a web URL and a meeting ID. It doesn't generate a telephone number, and that's where I'm confused, is how to produce that.
So you may not have the telephone option on. So you do have to tell it that people can join by phone.
Okay, so
under audio, you want to make sure that telephone and computer audio are selected.
Yes, I have telephone and computer audio selected. I don't know if there's anything that I need to say, dial in from the United States, dial a 1.
Well, and you can use any of the dial-in numbers. And as long as you have that meeting ID, you can get in.
So, but where are those numbers, I guess, is what I'm looking for.
I will put that into the, I'll put that into some of the resources I send out to y'all.
Okay, so these numbers that you put, those numbers don't change.
They do not.
Okay, so those are ones that Zoom doesn't uniquely create. You're just calling into a server and then you're entering in the meeting number and then that directs you to the meeting.
Right. That's correct.
Okay, I got it.
Yep.
I'm just going to cut and paste what you gave us.
Yep. And Mitzi points out it gives you these clickable links that if you load them up on a mobile device, it will let you tap them and it'll dial all the way through. It has all the commas and everything to pause and hold and all of that. So you can use those. Most of the time, I don't include those. It just confuses people.
Okay.
So, and these are not toll-free numbers. You can get a toll-free number, but it is very expensive. I think it starts at $100 a month. But you can, they're not 900 numbers either. So they don't charge you. They're just a regular number.
Right. Okay. Great. Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Let's see, David.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. So on your PowerPoint slide, the last picture, the very bottom thing has the URL that ends in Zoom-101. So when I went there right now, it shows the registration page for this meeting. Once this meeting's over, is that the link where a recording of this meeting is going to be, or what is that URL for?
In the next 24 to 48 hours, it will go from being the registration page to being the resources page.
Oh, okay.
It just hasn't happened yet. Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
Confirm.
Good question.
Thanks.
Yeah. Lloyd, did you have another question?
I did, Andy. How do you find somebody else in the meeting? Like if I want to speak to Kathy, how would I find her?
So if you would load up the chat room, and then it gives you an option to choose two, and you can choose everyone, or you can choose an individual in the chat room. If you want to speak to them, there's no way to speak to them kind of face to face without speaking to everyone.
Gotcha.
Okay?
Gotcha.
All right. Other questions? I meant Antonio asked in the chat room, has anybody ever used G Suite? I have tried several years ago and tried unsuccessfully. Although I will note that G Suite does have a really, they have been very generous in their options right now. So if you already have something there, they will give you, they have really good options for making that work. But I had real difficulty with various accounts issues. And I will also, David, I'm gonna expose you from our conversation yesterday. Antonio, you might look up David Steinbrenner, the communications person at Trinity Avenue in Durham, because he does use G Suite and may be able to commiserate with you if you'd like to know more.
Andy, I have a quick question.
Yeah, Clark, go ahead.
I read on Smart News where Zoom collects information and sells information to pay for the service unless you buy the Pro or the $100 a month or whatever the subscription. And they recommended Whereby. I believe it's a British meeting app, and didn't know if you had any thoughts on that. And about privacy.
I'm not familiar with Whereby. I'm not super familiar with Zoom's privacy policies. Probably should be more. The companies that I trust use Zoom regularly. It's a very, very common application. They're certainly collecting information, as is everyone.
Yeah.
If for some reason you are concerned about your use of Zoom by New Hope, I did notice the other day, there is an option where I can go in and enter an email address and remove all attached information. So if you are personally concerned, I'm happy to enter your email address in there.
I mean, I was just curious more than anything.
Yeah, I mean, but that's definitely something I will look at and make sure that we are not giving away the farm, if you will, for you. But Zoom has become the de facto standard, and it is. I've used some of the other software over the years, and it's a lot easier than most of the others, especially to get set up with people who are new.
Okay. Well, I just appreciate it. I know there's a trade-off between privacy and use of apps and the internet, and even with Facebook, of course. So it's something we all have to decide.
For sure. Yeah. And thank you for reminding us of the importance of that.
Sure.
Andy?
Yes, Spotswood.
I'm just curious, how much is this being used in our presbytery?
I know of probably at least 10 churches who have an account. I think some of them are on this call. I know that we use it at varying levels. I'd say in most months, we probably have 3 to 5 meetings on Zoom. But this month, we have gone well beyond that. Our usage to date this month is probably well above what we've used in the entire 3.5 years that we've had it before this. So yeah, people now have 2 accounts at First Newbern. First Raleigh is using Zoom tonight. And for their session meeting, I know of, I have at least 2 session meetings scheduled later on this month for other churches. I know we had a meeting earlier today. I've got 2 meetings tomorrow on Zoom. It's a very, and Jordan says we're doing youth group on Zoom. And several of you, and it's just story time, all sorts of great things happening. If you haven't heard, we have a small church worship service on Sunday mornings throughout the the COVID-19 crisis. We had 27 people from small churches join in on that. So it really has settled in and been a really good thing, I think. So, are there any final questions? Mark, you have a question? You're unmuted.
No.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have any questions before we close out?
Andy, I had one question I may have to ask you later, but I was just trying to set up the financial secretary's computer for just a Zoom trial meeting, with her, and I know it doesn't have a camera, but I tested the speaker, and the speaker worked. You could hear the test, but when I looked into the meeting with one other person, they could never. She couldn't hear anything that was being said in the meeting, and she couldn't be heard. But I guess I need to look a little more closely, maybe call you later to find out.
Well, actually, I will tell you very quickly, the trick there is use that option next to the audio selection to, I didn't mean to do that, to change it to use phone audio, because that will get you the option to join the audio by phone. Okay. And then you switch to phone audio, and then you can call in even as you see the video on your screen.
Gotcha.
Andy?
Yes.
This is not a question, it's a comment. I'm reaching the point where I'm needing to acknowledge that in some respects, we are recreating the way we do ministry in about a 2 or 3 week period here. We're going to have to find ways of informing our congregation about worship services and conducting meetings and everything else. I just wanted to acknowledge that to me, it is draining. I'm not a particularly technologically oriented person anyway, but with the assistance of my staff, Mitzi especially, we're making strides. We're doing this class tonight online, which includes a video. We're having a session meeting tomorrow night by this. Our committees are beginning to meet this way through Zoom. And if anybody else feels exhausted in this process, at least you can count me in your same ballpark. So just a comment for everybody. It seems as though we are reinventing the way we do ministry, all in a very short period of time.
I couldn't say it better. Thanks, Dwayne. The one thing I would add to that is simply be thoughtful about it and think about how you'd like to see it continue. Maybe we can figure out the way to say, okay, what meetings are we going to have in person? What meetings are we going to have by Zoom going forward? Last question here. Mary, you had one final question.
Yeah, I do. So I've been using a lot of technology for meetings and things here in the last couple of weeks, and I'm finding that a lot of it's crashing or that people are having trouble getting on. Do you think there's any chance of that happening, particularly with the free Zoom account?
I think they probably do give priority to paid accounts. The other thing I would note is I've had much better experiences at the office when I have been on a wired connection. So my desktop computer in the office is connected to the internet and to our network by wire. And that is a much more reliable situation.
I have one more, Andy.
So yes, last question.
All right, we are in a very rural community. The church doesn't even have internet. So that's the struggle I've got.
Mm-hmm. You're not alone, Spotswood. So, well, friends, thank you. It's after 4. I want to honor your time. I'm really grateful for you taking the time to join in on this. Please be in touch if I can be of further help. I will be in touch with some resources from today, and we'll get that website updated as well. If you have other questions, please send them my way. I'll try to answer them, and I want to support you all along the way. Many prayers for the health of our world and for your health and for the continued sustenance of our ministry. So blessings on you all, and we'll be in touch. Take care.
Thank you, Andy.
All right.